Well, I wanted to be a good brother of my priest today and decided. No, actually, it was Father Chaz that asked if, he said, hey, if you just want to preach, I'll celebrate the Mass. And I said, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. So anyways, today we get to allow Father Chaz to enjoy the beauty of this Mass whilst I preach this morning. Yesterday afternoon, I was up at home, as is my usual, right, on Saturdays, and it was wonderful because I was able to spend time with not only my mom and dad, but both my siblings, their spouses, and all the nieces and nephews. So we all got together we had a big family dinner yesterday, which was the first time we've been able to do that, I think probably since June. So it's been a little while since we've all been together, but it was wonderful. And at the end of the night, I was sort of playing around with the little kids. They were playing Catch Me. Okay, we all know that game. Uncle Brian, I want you to come and catch me. Okay. And what it involved, first of all, was roaring like a lion and scaring them away, and then running after them to pick them up. Now, eventually, they would run and they would run and they would run, and then they would stop running so that they could be caught. And because what they really wanted was for you to just pick them up and kind of throw them around and then make a joke with them. And the big joke in our family is when you get picked up as a little kid, against your will, you become what's called a sack of potatoes. I don't know if any of you ever had that as a child. That's what my dad, when I was a kid, used to call me. He would pick us up, he'd put us on his shoulders, and we would become a sack of potatoes. And then he would say, what am I supposed to do with this sack of potatoes? I know what I'll do. I'm going to put it in the oven and bake it. And we would say, no. And he would say, well, why? Aren't you a sack of potatoes? And we would say, no. Well, what are you? I'm your son. Right? So it was a fun little game about catch, right? Running and catching and then deciding what to do when you're caught. And it always comes back to, no, you can't put me in the oven because I'm not a sack of potatoes. So the sack of potatoes story in my childhood kind of reminds me of, okay, just go with me here. The story of today's gospel. The story of today's gospel is the story that Jesus tells the Pharisees about their own identity. And he does this by telling the quintessential story of two sons. Now, he's done this before as well, right? In Luke's gospel, one of the most famous parables that Jesus gives is the parable of the repentant son, right? Who goes off and he squanders all of his father's money, and then he changes his mind, and he comes back, and his father sets a party for him. But the son who was the good son who was working is all upset, all of this, right? We know that story, right? So it's like a motif, right? It's something that's well known, this kind of consider this. Consider this story where one son does X and one son does Y, and the moral lesson, right, in between the difference of their two actions is what we're supposed to learn. So Jesus goes about this, right, in respect to the Pharisees and to the chief priests of the people, and he said, consider this moral lesson. When he says, consider the story of a man with two sons. Because, of course, the difference in the story is the difference of what the two sons choose. What the two sons choose to do. And at the end of that story, Jesus says, tax collectors and prostitutes, they are entering into the kingdom of heaven before you because of how they responded to the preaching of John the Baptist. The preaching of John the Baptist was a preaching about repentance from one's sins, right? It was fundamentally about a changing of mind, and because of that changing of mind, a changing of ways, right? A changing of actions, a changing of choices. But there's a real nugget of wisdom that was lost on the elders and the chief priests of the people, which is exactly why they didn't get the story, but which is why the tax collectors and the prostitutes did understand the story. So listen with keen ears to how this unfolds. What is your opinion? A man had 2 sons. He came to the first and said, "Son, go out and work in the vineyard today." He said in reply, "I will not," but afterwards changed his mind and went. The man came to the other son and gave the same order. He said in reply, "Yes, sir," but did not go. Which of the 2 did his father's will? And of course they answer correctly. The first did his father's will. What was it inside of the 2 sons that determined the choices they would make? Why did the first son change his mind? And why did the second son lie? Well, in the story, as the father addresses his first son, he names him by name. He names him, son. Son, go out and work in the vineyard. And the son said, "I will not." How is it that he's able to change his mind? Because think about this. Think about this in relation to your life. How many times in your life have you ever known the right thing to do and then decided that you were going to go ahead and not do that thing? Man, if I could count the number of times, right? All of us. Doing the right thing is hard. Knowing the right thing is usually not as difficult as doing the right thing. My sense to you is this. What caused the first son to change his mind and to do the right thing is probably not necessarily because he wanted to. He told his father he wouldn't. But because in reconsidering the conversation with his father, he stopped at the first word and was shattered by the first word. Son. My sense is that the reason that he changed his mind to do the right thing was because he considered first not the order, but he considered first the identity. He considered first not the command, not the job. He considered first the relationship. And because he became convinced about the relationship, about his core identity, what was to be done then became able to be done in a way that it wasn't able to be done before. And this is exactly why the second son lied to his father, because his father gave him the same order. Son, go out today and work in the vineyard. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then he didn't go. He didn't respond, yes, father. Yes, Dad. It was yes, sir. Now, of course, we know, right, that sir, right, in our own day, right, can be something that we call our father, or yes, ma'am, right? Sometimes the way that we respond to our mother. But you don't ultimately relate to your mom or to your dad as ma'am and sir. We relate to our mom and dad as mom and dad. Mom and dad. My mom and dad don't call me Father Brian. My mom and dad call me Brian, because I'm still their son. The second son was not aware of who he was in relationship to his father. And if you're not aware of who you are in relationship to the true identity, the true relationship, sooner or later, you're not going to find yourself able to do the commands, right? To do what needs to be done. Because personal motivation only goes so far. We all know it, because we all know how difficult it is to do the thing even though we know the right thing. And how many umpteen times have each of us fallen in that way. And I still, man, every day I get to the end of the day and I'm like, we all think of something and we're like, oh man, yeah, still struggling, Lord. But this is the key. This is the key to Christian moral living. And this is exactly why tax collectors and prostitutes were entering the kingdom of heaven, because John came before them in the way of righteousness. And what did that first mean? That John exhibited in himself his identity, even before his preaching. It was clear by looking at John who John thought he was. And the magic, we'll say, of his preaching was that he was able to open up, even to the public sinners, the truth of their identity. And when even the public sinners became convinced of the truth of their identity, they no longer lived by their false identity as a tax collector, as a prostitute. They were actually able to change their mind and do something different because they knew themselves to be someone different. The absolute secret of Christian moral living, of doing the right thing, is not ultimately a question of what it is that I'm supposed to avoid and what it is that I'm commanded to do. It's ultimately a question of, well, who am I? Morality is not ultimately about doing. Morality is ultimately about being. And from my being, then flows my choices. Jesus' invitation to each of us is the same game as what it means to be chased and caught and wonder, am I really a sack of potatoes? Because sacks of potatoes are food for cooking that go in the oven. But even a little child knows that they don't belong in an oven because they're not a potato. They're a niece or a nephew. They're a son, they're a daughter. That's what defines their relationship to the people around them. And then, therefore, it's the way that they look at the world. Today, are you a sack of potatoes? Or are you a child? And in our lives of faith, whether we believe one thing or whether we believe the other thing makes all of the difference.